Okay, so we are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are on page 183 of the book and page 37 of the PDF. We're going to start reading the history of Alcoholics Anonymous.
We can make some important observations from the story of how the prototype organization AA came into existence. Back in the 1930s, alcoholism was accepted as it had been over the centuries as a hopeless, progressive disease which had baffled medical science and religion as well. In fact, the prevalence of alcoholism amongst the clergy itself was alarmingly high. All forms of drug addiction were thought to be incurable, and when they reached a certain stage, victims were put away.
So basically what are they saying, right? That since they had no treatment, they used to lock the people up. They couldn't do anything about the people.
In the early 1930s, a prominent American businessman known to us as Roland H., who had sought every cure for his alcoholism without avail, went to see the famous Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Jung treated Roland H. for approximately a year, by which time he had achieved some degree of sobriety. Roland returned to the United States full of hope, only to fall ill again with active alcoholism.
So what happens when you go into psychotherapy? The issue is taken care of for a bit. But if you go back into the original circumstances where the thing originated and you've not healed it from where it originated, the thing will come back. Okay, this is something that we experience in the personal development workshop, where you actually go into the origin of whatever habit you want to take care of and then remove it using the H+ commands. Okay, it's a very powerful process.
Roland went back to Switzerland to see Jung again and asked for further treatment. Jung humbly told him that neither his science nor art could help him further, but that throughout man's history, rarely, but from time to time, some who had abandoned themselves completely to some spiritual organization and surrendered to God for help had recovered.
So again, the point is that you're caught in a habit and you can get out of it if you connect to a higher goal or a higher lakshya. This is something that Nagarji also keeps talking in the Vedanta talks, that you need to associate with a step above yourself. This is again something that came out in the chakra, in the 7 chakra workshop also that we conducted, that if you are having a problem at one chakra, you have to bring in the essence of the higher chakra into the affirmations that you're saying for the lower chakra for the shift to take place, right? So over here, what he's saying, that you need to surrender yourself to God. You need to surrender yourself to something higher, and that will help your recovery.
Roland returned to the United States dejected, but he followed Jung's advice and sought out an organization of that time called the Oxford Groups. These were groups of individuals who met regularly to discuss living life according to spiritual principles, very much like those adopted later by AA. Through this means, Roland in fact recovered, and his recovery was a source of astonishment to another concerned party named Edwin T. or Ebby, also an alcoholic, hopeless beyond all help. When Roland told Ebby of how he had recovered, Ebby followed suit and also got sober. The pattern of one person helping another with the same problem then extended from Ebby to his friend Bill W., who had been hospitalized frequently for hopeless, incurable alcoholism and whose condition was medically grave. Ebby told Bill that his recovery was based on service to others, moral house cleaning, anonymity, humility, and surrendering to a power greater than oneself.
So again, shifting your state of consciousness, shifting the way that you are operating, shifting the way that you are doing things. Now, all these things like moral house cleaning means you're watching your thoughts, right? Anonymity, that means you're doing stuff, but you're not wanting your name. Humility again puts you on the right side of the grid. Surrendering to a greater power than him will automatically put him to the right side of the grid. So what was he saying literally over here? When you start operating from the right side of the grid, you put yourself in a position to heal and cure yourself.
Bill W. was an atheist and found the idea of surrendering to a higher power unappealing, to say the least. The whole idea of surrender was abhorrent to Bill's pride. He sank into absolute black despair. He had a mental obsession with and a physical allergy to alcohol that condemned him to sickness, insanity, and death, a prognosis which had been clearly spelled out to him and his wife, Louise. Ultimately, Bill gave up completely, at which point he had a profound experience of an infinite presence and light and felt a great sense of peace. That night, he was finally able to sleep, and when he awoke the next day, he felt as though he had been transformed in some indescribable way.
So again, he totally surrendered in the sense that he lost all hope, right? When you give up, you surrender. And this is something that we've seen in the aura photographs also. Violet is considered a highly spiritual color. But what I have found is that whenever violet comes, a person is highly sick or is going into a surrender mode. And from there, the healing starts to take place, right? So over here, the same thing happened to him. He went into that deep well of emotional, totally giving up. And then a light came and he got pulled out. Okay. So when a person totally gets into despair, many times the light comes because you surrender, you start accepting what is rather than fighting it.
The efficacy of his experience was confirmed by Dr. William D. Silkworth, his physician at what was then Towns Hospital on the west side of New York City. Silkworth had treated 10,000 alcoholics and in the process acquired enough wisdom to recognize the profound importance of Bill's experience. It was he who later introduced Bill to the great psychologist William James. Classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience. Bill wanted to pass his gift on to others, as he himself said, spent the next few months trying to sober up drunks, but without success. Eventually, he discovered that it was necessary to convince the subject of the hopelessness of his condition in modern psychological terms, to overcome his denial.
So again, you have to surrender and you have to let go of your denial. You have to start accepting what is happening to you. If you don't accept it, you cannot transcend it. So whenever we are looking at stuff, we say there are 5 stages to anything, any transformation taking place. The first thing is you need to be aware of the issue. Second is you need to accept the issue. Third is you brainstorm as to what is the solution you can get. Fourth is implement the solution. Fifth is observe whether the solution is working or not. If it's not working, go back to number 3 and start another process of implementing another solution, and so on and so forth. So over here, it's very clear that if you are not accepting your condition, you cannot heal it. Yes,
can you repeat the 4 conditions? Be aware.
The 5 conditions. The first is you need to be aware of the condition.
Yeah.
Number 2, you need to accept it. Okay, if you are aware but you don't accept that mere saath ye ho raha hai, then you are not going to be able to transform it. The third is you brainstorm as to what are the tools that we can use or what are the processes that we can use. Fourth is implement a solution that you found in step 3. Once you've implemented it, you need to observe whether it's working or not. If it's not working, go back to 3 and find another solution. But the main thing is, you first you need to be aware of the issue, right? If you're not aware, you can't find a solution. Then once you become aware, if you don't accept it, again, you can't find a solution. The third step is finding the solution. So first two are very important, whether you are aware of it and whether you are accepting it or not.
Bill's first success was with a surgeon from Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob, who turned out to have a great aptitude for the spiritual and became the co-founder of AA. He never took another drink until his death in 1956, nor did Bill W. until he died in 1980. The enormous power which was realized through Bill W.'s inner experience has manifested itself externally in the millions of lives which have been transformed because of it. In Life's listing of the 100 greatest Americans who ever lived, Bill W. is credited with being the originator of the entire self-help movement.
So again, basically, how do you help yourself, right? So this becomes very important. In most of these circumstances, no one can help you. You have to raise your level of consciousness yourself. No one can do it for you. Yes, by association, some transmission may take place, but ultimately you have to accept it. So you have to help yourself. Okay, no one can help you in, and especially again, when people get into depression also, we have to very clearly understand, we cannot help the person. We may be able to support the person, but the person has to help himself or herself.
The story of Bill W. is typical of individuals who have been channels of great power. The principles they convey in a brief career reorder the lives of millions over long periods of time. Jesus Christ, for instance, taught for only 3 short years, and yet his teachings transformed all of Western society for the generations since. Man's encounter with these teachings lies at the center of Western history for the last 2,000 years. The highest calibrations of attractor power fields which we have discovered have invariably been associated with the teachings of the great spiritual masters of history.
So again, whenever a spiritual master is preaching, they are operating at a very high level of consciousness, which is above 700, right? So naturally, most of the stuff which comes up above 700 is operating at a very high spiritual potency.
There is always a diminution from the calibrated power of the energy field of the original teachings of the great masters to their current practice in the form of organized religion. Yet, the original principles themselves retain their innate attractor power pattern. It is merely their expression which has become weaker. The teachings themselves have the same profound power they always did.
This is something I mentioned before, that when the teaching was given, the original teaching will still retain that original power, right? The original state of consciousness that it was operating in. But now as it percolates down, it starts to get diminished.
The power of a principle remains unchanged throughout time, whether we fully understand them or not. These principles are the ideals for which mankind strives. From our own struggles to better ourselves, we learn compassion for those still in the grip of inner conflict. Out of this grows a wisdom, including compassion for the entire human condition.
So again, as we start bettering ourselves, again, when we look at the levels of consciousness, when we go above 200, it becomes more, it reduces the self-centeredness and becomes all-encompassing. You start doing for others. As you start rising your level of consciousness, your inclusiveness of everyone around you starts to automatically expand.
If we refer to the principles of advanced theoretical physics and the results of our own attractor research, it will be obvious that in a universe in which everything is connected with everything else, unseen power accomplishes for us things that we could never do by ourselves.
So now this is also very important, right? We think that we are doing stuff, but actually we really do not understand what other powers, what other forces are actually influencing what we are doing. So again, we come back to that saying that if a butterfly flutters its wings in Brazil, it affects the entire universe. So every thought that everyone is having, everything that everyone is doing, everything that is happening is affecting everything else, right? And everything has a bearing on everything else. So if you think that we are operating in isolation, it is a fallacy.
As we have said before, we cannot see electricity, X-rays, or radio waves, but we know of an X air intrinsic power by virtue of their effects. Similarly, we constantly observe the effects of power in the world of thoughts and feelings, although until now it had not been considered possible to measure a thought.
So now, of course, we've got EEG measurements. What are you thinking? What is the state of consciousness that you're operating at? Where are you operating from? Can be seen on screen because of your brainwave patterns. How are your brainwave patterns concising? Are you having a combination which is required to take you into an awakened mind state, or a combination of factors which takes you into an evolved mind state, and so on and so forth?
When we discuss high power attractor fields, we frequently can allude to them only by means of symbols. National flags are just dyed patterns on pieces of material from a physical viewpoint, but men are willing to die for what they symbolize. Empowerment, as we have said, comes from meaning. Those things which have the greatest meaning to us arise from the spiritual, not the material world.
So again, anything that rises from a higher state of consciousness will automatically have more meaning than anything arising from a lower state of consciousness. So naturally, the flag of a country means a lot. It carries a huge meaning for the people concerned. And that is why that value or that level of consciousness gets created.
Thus far, we have seen that alignment with the principles associated with high power attractor energy fields can result in Olympic achievement, success in commerce, political victory on an international level, and recovery from hopeless progressive diseases. These same attractor patterns are responsible for the finest music ever written. They are the basis of the eminent religious teachings, the world's grand art and architecture, and the wellspring of all creativity and genius.
So again, when you are operating at a higher level of consciousness, the downloads start to take place. And if you again, we've repeated this many times, if you talk to any really good artist, they'll say, it came to me. I heard it in my head. I didn't think of it. And a good artist will always say, I saw it before I painted it, right? So where is it coming from? It's all coming from below the line, or it's a download which is taking place. And that can only happen when we are going into higher states of consciousness. It cannot happen at the lower states of consciousness.
Power in the arts. The great works of art, music, and architecture, which have come down to us through the centuries, are enduring representations of the effect of high attractor patterns. In them, we see a reflection of the commitment of the master artists of our civilization to perfection and grace, and thereby to the ennoblement of humanity.
So again, when you are operating in a higher state of consciousness, your focus, your ability to perceive, your ability to replicate, your ability to imbibe that energy into what you're doing starts to automatically get enhanced. So again, when we are doing the Vastu program, for instance, we definitely tell the participants that we make these energy rectification stickers. Now, when you're making the sticker, what are you thinking? What is the state of consciousness that you're operating at is in the sticker. Now, when you're installing the sticker, again, the same factor comes in. What is the state of consciousness that which you have installed the sticker? will have a bearing on the result that the sticker is going to provide for your client, provide for yourself if you're putting the sticker in your own house. So that becomes very important, right? And this is in fact true for anything that we do. If a mother is cooking her food, what is the state of consciousness with which the food is being cooked is in the food. You can do a trial. You get your servant to make a dish and your mother to make a dish for you, right? When you have the two dishes, the ingredients are exactly the same. You will find that there's a difference in the texture, in the taste, and how you feel when you are actually eating that dish. You'll feel there's a distinction there. So the same thing happens with artists also.
The fine arts have always provided the venue for man's highest spiritual strivings in the secular realm. As far back as the time of the sculptor Phidias in ancient Greece, it has been the role of the arts to realize in physical media ideals about what man could and should be, to set down in tangible form, accessible to all, a distilled expression of the human spirit. Great art bodies forth the ordered essence, not only of human experience, but of the world we live in too. It is this that we call beauty. Like the theoretical physicist, the artist finds order in apparent chaos.
So what is a theoretical physicist? He gets an idea and he hashes it in his brain. And many times the experiment is not possible in physical terms because the equipment and ingredients, etc., are not available. But they've written a theory, and when it gets actually implemented, it becomes a law. So like that over here, theoretical physicists are finding order in chaos. Like that, an artist has a block of, let's say, granite or a block of marble, and he can actually see what is the figurine inside that marble. And the point here is that remove the chaos to allow the essence to come out.
Where there was only a block of meaningless marble, Michelangelo sees the David or Pieta, and with his chisel removes the senseless stone to liberate that perfected image. Contemplating the random patterns of a meaningless plaster wall in the Sistine Chapel, he conceives through the inspiration of art a wondrous ABC. And then through the technique of art, he actualizes the A to B to C, as we know as the last judgment.
So again, the ABC means everything is getting downloaded. And then the manifestation takes place in a process, one step at a time, right? So the A may be that the plaster was put. The B is that he puts a scaffolding. The C is that he starts making the painting, right? But the entire image has already got downloaded, and the entire process, he already knows that this is what I need to do.
The bequest of the arts to man is internal too. In beholding realized beauty, a sensitivity to the beautiful is inculcated in us, enabling us to discover and create our own aesthetic rewards in the apparently disordered jumble of existence.
So again, that sensitivity, our bodies are extremely sensitive. This is something that again we talk about in the energy field and aura vastu program, where let's say you take an envelope in your hand and you observe your physiology, your breathing, the wetness in your tongue, you will find a shift taking place, right? When you find that shift taking place, you can understand whether something is good for you or it is something that is creating a stress for you, even without opening the envelope, right? So he says here that capacity to assess beauty, when you are connecting with something beautiful, automatically you will be shifted into a higher state of consciousness. So the stress will move out of your system. We are automatically calibrated to be able to do this. The point here is that we don't do it. We've stopped listening to our bodies. If you can start paying attention to your body, the kind of messages that you will get from your body is not funny.
Art and love are man's greatest gifts to himself. There is no art without love. Art is always the making of the soul. the craft of man's touch, whether that touch is corporeal or the touch of the mind and spirit. So it has been since Neanderthal times, and so it will always be. Thus, we find that computer-generated art and even great photographs never calibrate as highly as the original paintings.
So again, touch, feeling, okay, it is imbibed with that feel, that love. And if you're making a copy, your consciousness again comes in. So it will not calibrate at the same level. What was the love that was flowing out of a person when they were doing something can never be captured in a painting, in a picture, right? Or a copy.
A most interesting kinesiological experiment which anyone can reduplicate is to test the strength of a person who is looking at an original painting and then looking at a mechanical reproduction of that painting. When a person looks at something that has been handcrafted, he goes strong. When he looks at a reproduction, lie goes weak. And this is true regardless of pictorial content. An original of a disturbing subject will make the subject go stronger than a copy of a pleasant subject. Dedicated artists put love into their work. There is great power in both the human touch and human originality. Therefore, kinesiology provides a fail-safe detector of art forgery.
Okay, so what does this mean? The original will always carry a higher value of consciousness or will be operating at a higher value of consciousness than anything that is a copy. Okay, just 1 second. There's some shouting going on. I'll just tell them. Yeah, so when you stand in front of the original, what happens?
When you stand in front of the original, for me at least, it brings forth actual tears.
Yeah.
It's so overwhelmingly powerful, and it's pictures we've seen our whole life. We've studied what they were thinking, why they did what they did. But when you stand, there's most certainly some energy that comes out of it. And I never thought of it before until we read this.
Yeah.
It certainly affects the people who
The field, yeah. It'll affect your field.
You enter the Sistine Chapel, there's pin drop silence. Everybody's just staring up. There's not a word being said. And there's total mayhem in the passage outside.
Yeah.
You know? So it's literally, there's a
field
hush that comes. Yeah. A field. Yeah.
Absolutely. 101%.
The great psychoanalyst Carl Jung emphasized over and over again the relation of art to the dignity of man and the importance of the human spirit in art. Jung himself and his work calibrate highest of all the famous psychoanalysts of history. Many of the others aligned with such attractor patterns as material determinism produces much lower scores.
So now this is very important, what he is saying over here, that today, what is the consciousness level with which you are doing your work will reflect in your work. So she is saying very clearly that the work that Jung did and how it calibrates was at a very high level of consciousness, right? Now, let us say a psychotherapist is doing a psychotherapy session for you, but he is more interested in the fee that you're going to give him rather than the work he's doing. So that will reflect in the consciousness level or at which the transmission of that psychoanalytical session is going to take place. So what is the level of consciousness with which a person is operating becomes extremely, extremely important. Okay, this is very, very clearly he's saying. So material determination, what does that mean? That if he's looking at a material object from that particular spiritual thing that he's doing, it will lower the level of consciousness. So where are you operating from? Now, this is the reason why many of the so-called gurus, the spiritual gurus, they are out to make money. So when they are out to make money, the level of consciousness automatically drops because it can go to greed also, right? Whereas if you're operating at a higher level, you'll find that the people who were really, really spiritual, they had no requirement of the monetary thing. They didn't look at it too much, right? They may have had an overall view, but they really didn't bother about it. They were more intended on imparting the knowledge or imparting the teachings rather than looking at the financial gains from it. Okay. So this is a distinction between today's so-called gurus and the gurus of yesteryears. They used to operate at a different level of consciousness altogether.
Music is in some ways the most subtle, in that it is the least concrete of the arts. However, in bypassing left brain rationality to appeal directly to our subconscious right brain sense of pattern, it is at the same time the most visceral and emotional. It also provides the easiest example of how attractor patterns order reality. If you wish to comprehend the difference between chaos and meaning, thereby attaining an effective definition of art, simply contemplate the difference between noise and music.
So when you hear noise, it irritates you, it pulls you down. When you hear a good piece of music, it's going to lift you up, right? So what is the level of consciousness with which the music is operating? And this is true. I mean, I can vouch for it that, for example, Hemisync operates at a pretty high level of consciousness. So it tends to lift you up.
A description of the creative process by the contemporary Estonian composer Arvo Pärt, whose work is often described as transcendental or mystical, condenses much of what we have observed regarding the crucial role of artistic genius in the unfoldment of attractor patterns. To write, I must prepare myself for a long time. Sometimes it takes 5 years.
So this is important. Okay, now he says to write, I must prepare myself. So whenever you're going to do something, you need to start observing your level of consciousness. Where are you operating from? Now, this is something that we are constantly talking about, that figure out on the resilience grid, which side of the grid are you operating from, the left side or the right side? Most of the time, if you're operating from the right side, manifestation will take place. But if you're operating from the left side, which relates to the consciousness level on the consciousness scale below 200, everything on the consciousness scale below 200 falls on the left side. Everything above that falls on the right side. So again, where are you operating from? So he says very clearly that before he starts, he actually needs to prepare himself to do it. Now, this is true for any activity that you do. You're going to cook, you're going to read a book, you're going to do whatever. What is the level of consciousness you're operating from?
In my life, my music, my work, in my dark hours, I have the certain feeling that everything outside this one thing has no meaning. The complex and many-faceted only confuses me, and I must search for unity. What is
so
it?
Again, this also becomes important, right? So when we get into higher states of consciousness, automatically oneness, unity, you start getting out of individuality, right? It is not my, it is ours. You shift your state, the way that you're processing the data also.
What is it, this one thing, and how do I find my way to do it? Traces of this thing appear in many guises, and everything that is unimportant falls away. Here I am, alone with silence. I have discovered, sorry, I lost it. I have discovered that it is enough when a single note is beautifully played. That is my goal. Time and timelessness are connected. This instant and eternity are struggling within us.
So what does that mean? That even that one note played at the perfect time, at the perfect volume, at the perfect pitch, okay, can transform anything. So that perfection can come only when we are going into that deep state of consciousness, which is totally connecting us with universal consciousness, or we are getting into the flow.
Amongst the arts, it is music that most readily brings tears to our eyes, or brings us to our feet, or inspires us to pinnacles of love and creativity. We have already noted that longevity seems to be a corollary of association with the attractive fields of classical music, whether as performer, conductor, or composer. Classical music often demonstrates extremely high inherent power patterns.
So classical music operates normally, Beethoven, Mozart, all these musicians, they operated at a high level of consciousness.
But of all the arts, architecture is the most tangible and influential in the lives of men everywhere. We shop, go to work, and seek our entertainment in buildings. Thus, the form of the structure itself, because its influence is a background to so much human activity, deserves the utmost attention.
So now, what is the energy field of the place that you're looking at or you're living in becomes extremely, extremely important. Place where you're working, place where you're sitting and doing stuff. This is again what we are talking about in the Vastu and Energy Field program, that you can actually shift the level of consciousness of your space, right? So designing your space becomes very, very important because it has a constant influence on you. And if that influence is not uplifting, it is not taking you into a higher state of consciousness, it will result in problems in your lives, right? Because it is not allowing you to function in the most efficient and effective manner that you possibly can.
But of all the arts, architecture is the most tangible and influential in the lives of men everywhere. We've read this. Among all world architecture, the great cathedrals elicit a special awe. Their energy patterns have calibrated the highest among architectural forms. This appears to be the result of several factors. Our experience of cathedrals can combine a number of arts simultaneously: music, sculpture, painting, as well as spatial design. Moreover, these edifices are dedicated to the divine. That which is begotten in the name of the Creator is aligned with the highest attractor patterns of all. The cathedral not only inspires, but unifies, teaches, symbolizes, and serves all that is noblest in man.
So what is the intent behind making something? What is the intent behind doing something will reflect in that. And when there is a combination of various fields, okay, it automatically starts to operate at a higher vibratory frequency. Now, if you see most of the temples, most of the cathedrals, most of our temples also, there was a design factor in it, how it was made. Also, they used to be able to find the power spots on which the cathedral was made, so that the energy from the cathedral or from the temple was radiated into the rest of the space. And even when you see civilization as a whole, most of the time, the temple or the place of worship was always the center part of that entire village or that entire city. And the city grew around that space of worship because that was a power spot. It was an energy generator. So it became the fulcrum point of all the activity taking place.
Bhaiya, can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah.
You said it for the...
Yeah, just 1 second, please. Just hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the architecture and some of the buildings in the olden days have been built by slaves and people who have been... So that feeling, that will be there in those...
Correct,
buildings.
Absolutely. That will also be there. 101%.
That would be, people stand in awe of so many of these buildings, but I always feel that, think of, the pyramids. I can't imagine how they were lifted up. It always, and there must have been so many slaves and workers who would have,
you have to understand that there are various factors playing a role in this, right? Number one is the conceptualization of that structure. what was the level of consciousness with which that structure was actually conceptualized? Number one, right? Number two, what was the intent behind making that structure? Right. Now, once the structure comes up, of course, the factor that you're saying that people may have suffered while making that edifice also, that energy will also be there. But what is the energy radiated by the structure will also take care of a lot of the stuff that is being. So it's always a plus and a minus, right? Ultimately, if the energy being generated is higher than the depleting forces over there, then it can start becoming an uplifting thing. It can start raising the level of consciousness of people.
Okay.
You get that? So it's a mixed bag. It's not a simple thing that A plus B is equal to C. It doesn't happen like that. Over here, what are we saying? A, B, C come together, right? It's a gestalt of that entire field.
Beauty in architecture, however, need not be expansive nor grand in scale. There are few architectural settings more charming than the little thatched cottages dotting the Irish countryside, each one more quaint and picturesque than the last. Innate appreciation for the aesthetic allows in much traditional domestic architecture elegant statements of beauty and simplicity.
So again, what happens is that again, what is the intent with which something is made? Whether it is connecting with the flow, whether it is operating in from a power spot, right? So maybe there's just a spring and you've just created a wall around that spring, but that spring is centered in a power spot. When you go there, you'll automatically start feeling uplifted. Okay, so these things happen. In architecture, in many of these cathedrals and even in our old temples, there is a conjunction of underground water streams which take place, which again raise the level of consciousness of that space. So there's so many factors involved in this.
Well-conceived public architecture speaks with historical authenticity of the beauty of line combined with utility. Function and beauty are impressively joined in the great subway stations of Russia and the design and layout of many new high-rise apartment buildings in Canada. Older cultures seem always to have known the practicality of beauty, that which is designed without beauty quickly deteriorates.
So now this is important. When something has beauty, it is operating at a higher level of consciousness, which automatically implies that entropy is lower. So what is entropy? Everything's going towards ultimate destruction. So anything that has beauty will sustain for a longer period of time than something which does not have beauty.
An architecturally ugly neighborhood becomes part of a feedback loop of blight and violence. The sleazy, dehumanized housing projects of urban ghettos manifest their weak power patterns as a matrix for squalor and crime.
So again, the planning of a city, the planning of an environment can make or break that environment, because if the energy field is not good, it will attract the lower fields, and that's what happens in the ghettos. Okay, so if they could have put certain principles within the architecture of these ghettos, it could have changed the field of the place, and it would not have become what these ghettos ultimately become.
Although it must be remembered that depending on which attractor pattern one aligns with, the destitution of the ghetto can be an excuse for depravity or the inspiration to rise above it. It is not the facts of one's environment, but one's attitude towards them that determines whether they will be the occasion for defeat or the inspiration to victory.
So now, in the Vastu program, we make a disclaimer right in the beginning that Vastu is not the end all and for all of health. It is not the end all and for all of finance. And it is not the end all and for all of well-being, right? Our inner state of consciousness is actually more important than our environment. Now, if I can be in equanimity and harmony within myself all the time, I become the bigger magnet. So I start influencing the environment instead of the environment influencing me. Having said that, if your environment is designed and is generating a good field, it is helpful. But we can always rise above our environment.
Grace is the expression of the power of aesthetic sensitivity, and power is always manifested with grace, whether in beauty of line or style of expression.
So again, power is always expressed with beauty, right? It has a grace in it. It has a gentleness. It has compassion, right? You're not operating out of force. You're not forcing things down the gullet. You're presenting it in such a way that if the other person wants to take it, they take it or they reject it. It doesn't matter to the person operating at a higher level of consciousness.
We associate grace with elegance, refinement, and economy of effort. We marvel at the grace of the Olympic athlete, just as we are uplifted by the grace of the Gothic vault. Gracious power patterns acknowledge and support life, respect and uphold the dignity of others. Grace is an aspect of unconditional love. Graciousness also implies generosity, not merely material generosity, but generosity of spirit, such as the willingness to express thanks or acknowledge the importance of others in our lives.
So again, we constantly in all the workshops, we are talking about appreciation. We are talking about gratitude. Now, these are the two milestones which can easily shift you from the left side of the grid into the right side of the grid. If you can find something to appreciate, something to be grateful in any situation that you are in, it may be the worst possible situation. You can still rise above it because you are connecting with a higher attractor field.
Grace is associated with modesty and humility. Power does not need to flaunt itself through force, always must, because it originates in self-doubt. Great artists are thankful for their power, whatever its expression, because they know it is a gift for the good of mankind, entailing responsibility to others.
So again, force does not need to flaunt itself. Power needs to always flaunt itself. It needs to show itself. When you meet a really powerful person, you will not find the person shouting and screaming all the time. Okay. There will be a gentleness. There will be a force which is there inside him, which is originating, right? But if a person wants to flaunt his authority, that means that he is operating out of force, not out of power.
Beauty has expressed itself in so many different forms in different cultures throughout various periods of time that we have good reason to say it is the eye in the eye of the beholder. However, we should note that it is only the vehicle of beauty that changes. The essence of beauty does not change. Only the form in which it is perceived. It is
now what is he saying over here? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So again, I'm saying you can find something to appreciate in everything that is there. And if you go into appreciation, your level of consciousness automatically shifts, right? So again, what are we noticing becomes very, very important. And this is something that we are finding in the biofield tuning sessions that I've been doing now, that when it gets, when the sun star gets stuck over here in the eye level, the question that comes up always is, what are you noticing? Are you noticing in your life all depleting stuff, or are you noticing in your life uplifting stuff? What are you noticing? So what is the consciousness level that you're operating from will also imply what you're noticing or how you are noticing. The same thing one can find, Mr. A will find beauty in, and Mr. B will find everything depleting in. So what are you noticing becomes very important. So the eyes of the beholder.
It is interesting that people of advanced consciousness are able to see beauty in all forms. To them, Not only is all life sacred, but all form is beauty.
So again, when you operate in a high level of consciousness, everything around you becomes beautiful. Okay. So I think we can stop here instead of starting a new chapter. Anyone, anything to say or add?